Well, hello, folks. You know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for the Rec Poker Podcast. This is a special edition of the podcast. We're going to be talking about H.O.R.S.E, the great mixed game of horse. You may have heard it described as heroes. Maybe we'll talk about the difference. Maybe we won't. I'm not a mixed game guy. That's why I'm joined by the Wrecking Crew. Let me give you a little background. My name's Jim Reid. I'm the host tonight. I've got the best freaking job in the world. I'm Bluff Starini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. And I have to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. They are the official sponsor of the Rec Poker Podcast. And most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we really depend on the support of our sponsors and our premium members who get involved in our training material and study opportunities for only $15 a month. And you can get your first month for only $5 by using the code RECPOKER at checkout. But we're not just for those with folding money in their pocket. You can come and get a free account at Rec Poker anytime. All it takes is an email address and a smile, and we insist on both, but I think you'll be happy if you do, because it unlocks a trove of features and resources and tools and friends you haven't met yet. Friends like the other members of the Wrecking Crew. Now, you get used to hearing my voice on Mondays because they let me host the show, but I'm just one guy. It takes a gang, a crew, a group to make the magic happen here at Rec Poker. We call this group of wizards the Wrecking Crew, and if you want to find out more about me and the rest of the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or just listen up. You're going to meet a few of them here on the show tonight, starting with the one and only John Somsky.
I'm John Somsky, also known as Poker Geek MN everywhere, and I help coordinate the home games.
I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of each month, you can join us for the book study.
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss or as Gopherboy TJM in the Rec Poker home game, which I stream live on Twitch Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central at twitch.tv/recpoker.
And speaking of the home game, that's just one of the perks of getting a free community membership here at Rec Poker. And part of our plans of 2024 involve emphasizing bringing mixed games to some of our No Limit Hold'em players. So on the second Wednesday of every month, we're having a mixed game as part of our Player of the Year race. And so we'll be releasing a podcast episode each month going over the feature game of that month's mixed game. It's a different mixed game every month, and we're having a great time rolling through them and sort of getting into some of the strategy and mechanics of how to play each mixed game. So because a lot of our listeners are going to be new to these mixed games, we're doing some practice mixed games on the third, fourth, and fifth Wednesdays of the month. And if I've done my math right, this episode should come out on Tuesday, and tomorrow will be the third Wednesday of the month, which means that the first horse practice mixed game will be tomorrow night, and there'll be another one next week before we get together on the second Wednesday of next month to play for all the marbles. So, John Somsky, you've been putting this group of home games together, of mixed games rather, together, stacking the concepts month by month. We're now into H.O.R.S.E. Tell us a little bit about why it's H.O.R.S.E and not heroes. What does that mean? And what are we going to learn about this month as we explore this new mixed game?
So H.O.R.S.E is basically the same thing as Heroes. It's just a different order of letters, but the same games. In this game, we really aren't introducing any new game. The concept that we're introducing is playing different games throughout the tournament. If you've ever gotten bored just playing Hold'em for an entire tournament, imagine that every 8 hands you'd be playing a completely different game. Well, with H.O.R.S.E, you get to do that. The way H.O.R.S.E, these games are typically done is that you still have, in tournaments, you have blind levels based upon the hours on the clock. So the blinds will move up every half hour or whatever your schedule says. But you switch games after a certain number of hands. So you'll play 8. Typically, it's done 8 hands most of the places that I've played. So you'll play 8 hands of Hold'em. Limit Hold'em, 8 hands of Omaha 8 or better. So we played both of those in April and June. Then we move on to Raz, which we just played last month. Then we move on to Stud. Now this is Stud high only. Technically, we've never played that. However, it's just like Stud 8 or better, meaning the bring in is the lowest possible card, and then the action goes to the best possible hand afterwards. Except for it's not a split pot game. The high hand wins it all. So obviously, you're better off having more high cards. The deuces and threes aren't quite as good. Then we move on to the E. The E actually stands for 8 or better. And this was a bit of artistic license to make a word that actually was a word.
Sure.
So that is 7-card Stud 8 or better, which we did play back in June. So this is just putting a whole bunch of games that we've already played together, but it making its own brand new mix game of H.O.R.S.E. And if you get short in this game, probably the Omaha 8 and the Stud 8 sections are the best sections for you to kind of push a little bit. The reason being it's a split pot game, and often even if things don't go your way, you might fall into half of the pot. And you can you have more opportunities to try to build your stack back up.
I like it.
Variants.
And I guess people are going to be better and worse at different ones of these mixed games that we're playing. So you might sort of choose to sort of just get out of the way on some of them that you're less experienced with, and really try and like apply some pressure on the games that you're more comfortable with.
And one of the important things to note here is in this game, all of the 3 stud variants are played back to back. That's one of the reasons why some people like the Heroes format better, is that it spreads them out a little bit more. What that means,
I see. Yeah.
is you have to pay attention, because more than once I have been playing a great Raz hand when the rest of the table, is actually playing 7-card Stud. And obviously, unless you happen to hit your straight there for your Raz hand, it's probably not going to work out so well for you. So if you play enough H.O.R.S.E, you will be playing the wrong game sometimes. It does say right on the felt in Poker Stars what game you're playing. If you're playing at a casino, they'll typically have a plaque that shows the active game. So don't be afraid to double check that early and often.
That sounds like good advice. So paying attention feels like that's really important. And I'm sure it happens to the best of us. Rob, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I've done that before. Yeah, I think you mentioned what are your best games, what are your worst games, and that's good for your individual strategy. But at the same time, you have to pay attention to your opponents and see where their comfort level is. Because even though one of those games might not be your best game, it might be their worst game. And so you can, based on that, put a little more pressure on them, because they're not quite as sure how they stand in the hand. So pay attention, really pay attention to your opponents in H.O.R.S.E to see which games they feel most comfortable with. And most players playing H.O.R.S.E are going to be probably pretty good at most of the games, because you don't see a lot of hold'em, no limit hold'em players sit down to a H.O.R.S.E tournament.
Right.
Because they haven't played those individual games that often. So typically people that are playing H.O.R.S.E are used to playing those mixed games. So if you're not, I would also do a little studying before I sat down at a H.O.R.S.E table to make sure that I understood all the rules of all the games and some of the strategies.
And of
Good
course,
tip.
take full advantage of playing for free in our Rec Poker home games, where you can not worry about making the wrong play, because the software kind of guides you along and you're not at risk of losing any money.
That's right. And it's unlike a lot of other play money games out there. Everyone here is really trying their best and trying to learn, and people take it seriously. That's why it is referred to as the toughest play money tournament series in the multiverse, from what I hear. Taylor?
Yeah, not too much to have for tips when it comes to Raz or Horse, just because we've talked about Raz, we've talked about Hold'em, we've talked about Omaha, we've talked about all these different pieces in earlier episodes. So like a lot of the tips come from there. But the one thing to know, like with Horse, is because we're switching games, there is kind of like this dynamic to like how stuff is flowing, where you just switch to Omaha, it feels like people are a bit thrown off and are a little bit more hesitant to play hands, but then they get into the groove of playing Hold'em, and then all of a sudden, they kind of get back up into playing more. But then they switch into Raz, and then there's kind of that same general like initial hesitancy to how games are being played. So if you can kind of take advantage of that, it is potentially a little bit more advantageous to try and play the first hand of Hold'em, the first hand of Raz, when you're making that switch from a stud game to a non-stud game, or a non-stud game to a stud game, and just that like change of atmosphere to some of the people at the table.
I like that. Sort of like the NFL equivalent of going for the deep ball right after the turnover. That change of momentum, seize that while the energy is low.
Right.
And of course, look for people who didn't notice the switch between
Oh, yeah, sure.
And also, particularly if you are ever playing live and it looks like someone is playing the wrong way, remember, one player to a hand. It is not your job to inform them that they have not noticed the game switch.
That's true.
If they ask you, don't lie to them. Tell them what game we're playing, all that type of stuff. But it's on them to get that information, and the rest of the table will probably maul you if you let someone know when they didn't ask.
Yeah, one player per hand. Like, that's a great way of putting it, because I can see how, as an outsider, you'd think, oh, I'm a nice person, I should help this person who's confused. But that's actually not allowed by the rules of poker. Like, one player per hand is exactly the right way to think about that. And
that'd be the same as saying, hey, you have aces pre-flop, that's the best possible hand, you have to raise.
right.
You wouldn't do that to a player playing a hand. You also don't do this.
Very well put. Very well put. All right. Well, we've got a whole slew of poker pros and celebrities lined up to offer their own tips on how to play Horse. So let's just hear what they have to say, and we'll get back to you on the other side. All right, Chad McVean, give me some advice on how to play Horse.
Horse, you've got 5 different games. Now, you don't need to be proficient in all of them. You just hopefully you can find out which ones your opponents don't like. Those are the ones you want to run, because in a horse game, people will tend to sit back and not really play the games they don't like. Hold'em, limit Hold'em. People will tend to think that it's actual Hold'em and play bad hands. Play solid hands. Omaha, 8 or better. Again, you want to start with something great. You want to have it a good solid hand. The Raz, stud 8. You need to start with solid. It's going to be costly because there's 5 rounds of betting. But if there's a game in here that you're not comfortable with, you can easily sit out that round. You're probably going to miss 8 hands. It's not going to hurt you that much.
Okay, Chris Fox Wallace, give me some tips on how to play Horse.
Start by buying my horse book. That'll help a lot. The shameless plug.
Do it.
In cash games, you really can identify a lot of different player types, more so I find than in most other cash games, more so than in no limit Hold'em or PLO cash games or limit Hold'em cash games. You've got the very aggressive older person who's like reasonably tight and super aggressive, and they're just betting every street, right? Identify that person when you see them and know how to play against them. You've got the beginner who's loose and passive, and you know how to play against them. You're going to run into them a lot more here than you are to no limit, a 1-3 no limit game. You're going to run into those beginners more often. And you have you have a lot of people who have like a poker attitude where they don't, you're not pushing me around. I'll raise you again. How you like that? You're going to run into those people and know how to play with them, because you got so many different personalities in Horse. And then identify which games they play well and mark that permanently. My memory for players isn't always great. So I really make it a point to mark this person plays this game this way, right? I know Ted Forrest plays a ton of hands in Omaha 8. I remember that. I marked it. I'll never forget that he does that because he plays quite well after the flop. And so I have to isolate him, or I have to punish him when I'm ahead, or I have to play hands that make monsters if I'm going to let him and everybody else in the hand, because he's going to play well post flop, and I better have a hand if I'm going to be getting, screwing around. So, look for those, which games people play well and which they play badly, and mark those. You don't get that chance nearly as often in other games as you do in horse.
All right, Mike Patrick, give me some tips on how to play horse.
All right. So with horse, this is the first one we're talking about that is actually a mix of multiple games. So there's 5 games in this mix. So the best advice I can give you is to make sure that you are aware of which games you are the weakest at. And hopefully there's only like one game that you're weakest at. Recognize that and do not get yourself in trouble in over your head in that game, because if you have an edge in the other games, don't handcuff yourself by putting yourself in bad spots in the game that you're not as comfortable with. Like, I'll fully admit that I'm not the best limit hold'em player out there, because nobody likes playing limit hold'em, especially me. So that is definitely the game that I work least on. But I know enough that I'm comfortable-ish in it. But I definitely do limit how creative I may get playing limit hold'em, because I know it's not the strongest game in my mix, and I will have a bigger edge playing the other 4 games in there. So whether it's limit hold'em, whether it's stud, whether it's stud 8, whichever game in the mix that you recognize that you're maybe not the strongest in, try to keep yourself out of trouble in that game, and vice versa. If you recognize that other players are making mistakes in a certain game, recognize that those are games that you can be more aggressive and pick on them with. So if your opponent is showing problems in stud 8, you can get a little more aggressive against them in stud 8, but recognize your opponent's weaknesses, recognize your own weaknesses, and you'll be okay.
All right, Norman, Chad, give me some tips on how to play horse.
Okay. Horse is my favorite. It's not spread too often, virtually never spread in a card room. As a tournament, it's great to play 5 different games. Most horse players, though, who are mixed game players, would like to throw out hold'em, because hold'em you can play any day of the week anywhere. I know this is limit hold'em. So we've actually proposed like replacing hold'em with deuce to 7 triple draw, another mixed game. But horse again is, so what a lot of us do who don't play hold'em a lot when we play horse is when there's a hold'em hand, I don't want to lose a cent in hold'em. So in horse, if you're not familiar with hold'em, and for you people getting familiar with mixed games, maybe you're going to love horse. You're going to love hold'em, but we just skip hold'em. Like you got to have something really good in position to play in hold'em. I just don't want to lose chips at hold'em. So if you're a mixed game player, you generally stay away from the hold'em streets if you can, because you don't play hold'em at all. But hold'em is the other. You got it's 3 stud variants. And the stud variants are very important in horse. They have an extra betting round than the flop games. So you have an extra big betting round. So you could get crushed in the stud variants. Again, starting hands and making a decision on 5th Street, which is the first big bet, is very important in stud, raz, and stud 8, because then you're going to be committed to 3 big bets. And towards the end of a tournament, when you don't have a lot of bets left, you want to be saving bets more than you want to try to be making thin value bets. So you got to be very careful in the stud variants to play really good cards, especially down the stretch in a tournament, because that extra big bet will eat you up if you're playing crap.
All right, Robbie Strazynski, give me some advice on how to play horse.
All right, very important. The R, S, and E, Raz, stud, stud 8 or better. The game changes every orbit, every 6 hands or every 8 hands, whatever it might be. Pay attention to what game you're playing. Do not play the wrong game. It'll happen. You might make mistakes, but the easiest way to do it, look at the plaque on the table. What does it say? That's the game you're playing. Play that game, not one of the other games.
All right, Shannon Van Den Berg, give me some tips on how to play horse.
Okay, 3 tips is really hard in a 5 variant game. Horse, play to your strengths. So you have hold'em, 08, raz, stud, and stud 8 in the and I think PokerStars still play it that way. Nowadays they're starting to move it around to more of a heroes type acronym. Same games. Play to your strengths. Everything is limit, so you've got time to select your hands. When you're looking at your stack, as long as you've got 8 big bets, then you're not ultra short like you are in No Limit Hold'em in the same situation. So you've still got time to play some hands. If you are short and you need to get it in, stud 8 is your best equity-wise game to be getting it all in. If you like, you just want to run it against a player or a couple of players. But play to your strengths. Don't get concerned if you start getting short, but also protect your chips because it's a limit game. And as the limits get up, it starts to get pretty cruel when you miss some hands.
All right. Well, that was another fun conversation about mixed games. My thanks to, of course, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their support over the years. To John Somsky and the other members of our Wrecking Crew panel here talking about their love of mixed games, and all our fantastic guests who contributed their segments, their thoughts and tips and advice on how to get the most out of some different mixed games that we're going to be playing. So I'd encourage you, head on over to rec.poker, sign up for a free account there. You can go to rec.poker/home game and find out all about the different mixed games that are being played throughout the year, a different one every month. And I would encourage our listeners, if you're a No Limit Hold'em player, dip a toe into some of the mixed games. You'll be surprised how much fun you can have. So without further ado, I'll just say thanks for joining us for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. And I hope I get to see you all again next week or sometime real soon. Good luck on the felt, folks. Thanks again. Bye for now.